To say hello everyone and welcome. It's great you could all join us. I'm Helen Richardson. I'm president of Sakadita Australia. And it's a great pleasure to introduce our very special guest this morning or this evening where she is. Sharon Salzberg is a world-renowned meditation teacher and author. She's the co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society. She's been teaching meditation since 1974. She's also the author of 11 best-selling books, including her most recent, which is called Real Change, Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World. We've asked her to speak on mindfulness and loving kindness in the time of a pandemic and other crises. There will be some time for questions at the end, and it's best to write your question in the chat room in the first instance. Sharon, thanks again for giving us some time today. Perhaps we could start with some meditation.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm actually missing Australia right now in this moment. So it's just one of those moments of recognition that I haven't traveled in a while. And I'd be delighted to lead some meditation. So why don't we do some loving kindness meditation together? Some of you may be quite familiar with it. I'll guide it just in a brief way. There are many different ways of doing this particular practice, as with many techniques. The way that I was taught, the way I teach, has to do with choosing certain phrases, which are the intention of the heart to include, to care, to recognize, to pay attention differently. And rather than resting our attention on something like the feeling of the breath or some sound or whatever, we rest our attention on the silent repetition of these phrases. These phrases are an offering, they're gift giving. It's like generosity of the spirit. And we offer to a variety of different beings. We start classically with ourselves, making this offering of loving kindness to ourselves. We go through many iterations of people we feel grateful for, friends, difficult people, and we come to the offering of these phrases of loving kindness to all beings everywhere, to the boundlessness of life. So this doesn't mean that we're supposed to like everybody. It actually doesn't mean we have to like anybody. It's not like we're approving of somebody or we're striving to have some great warm feeling overcome us. It's that we're paying attention differently. If we think about ourselves, many of us will more likely think about our flaws and what we don't like rather than wish ourselves well. If we think about somebody we encounter casually, like a checkout person in a supermarket, maybe we have the tendency to look through them more than look at them. And so it's a transformation on a very different level. I say all that so that as we do this practice, you don't struggle. You don't have to struggle to feel anything special. It's fine. And going through all of those categories is way too many for a short period of practice. So I'm going to just suggest some as we unfold, starting with ourselves, ending with all beings everywhere. So you can sit comfortably. Just be at ease. You may already have a practice and phrases, and so that's fine if you just continue on. Common phrases that people use these days in this act of gift giving, of offering, are things like, may I be safe? May I be safe? Be happy, be healthy, live with ease. Live with ease means in the things of day-to-day life like livelihood and family, may not be such a struggle. May I live with ease. People often say to me, well, who am I asking? We're not asking anybody anything. We're offering, we're giving. May I be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And you can repeat those phrases or any phrases you want over and over again with enough space and enough silence so that it's a rhythm that's pleasing to you. This is like the song of the heart. You don't have to struggle to have some great feeling. The power of the practice is completely gathering our attention behind one phrase and then the next. And should your attention wander, or when your attention wanders, it's okay. You can recognize that, see if you can let go. Simply come back to the phrases. May I be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And think of a benefactor. A benefactor is somebody who's helped you. Maybe they've helped you directly. Maybe they helped pick you up when you've fallen down. Or maybe you've never met them. They've inspired you from afar. It's an embodiment of the force of love for you. Could be an adult, could be a child, could be a pet. The texts say this is the one whom when you think of them, you smile. So if there's someone like that in your life, you can bring them here. Get an image of them or say their name to yourself. Get a feeling for their presence. And offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. Even if the words don't seem perfect, they're carrying the heart's energy, so they're serving us. May you be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease, or whatever phrases you're using. And just for fun, for a few moments, let's have that benefactor offer loving kindness back to us. So you can put yourself in the position of the recipient. See what it feels like. Might feel glorious, might feel horribly embarrassing. See if you can let all of the emotions just wash through you as you steady your attention on the phrases. And then we're going to have a gathering, just whoever comes to mind. Family, friends, colleagues, puppies, cats, birds. Just see who arises in your mind and offer the phrases of loving kindness to them. May you be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And then all beings everywhere, all people, all creatures, all those in existence, near and far, known and unknown. May all beings be safe, be happy, be healthy, live with ease. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze and we'll end the meditation.
Thank you, Sharon. That was beautiful. I have some questions, and my questions are slanted towards what's going on in the world today and how we should respond to this in terms of being Buddhist practitioners. It's sort of the title of our talk today. But first, Sharon, our hearts do go out to you in America. Your death toll from the pandemic is really horrific, with so many people affected, and it's a time of huge suffering. And watching the news here every night, we've been horrified. Could you talk a little about what it's been like for Buddhist practitioners? What, if anything, they can do?
Well, it has been really a tremendous amount of suffering, and as you know, we were speaking a little bit earlier. I was thinking again about how different it has been apparently around different places in the world, and so um, not only do I feel very connected to the American experience, but I also feel very connected to the New York experience because I'm from New York City and I spend not this last year, but I usually spend quite a bit of time there and have an apartment there. So, um, and that was a place that was just decimated through the pandemic. And so I also feel like because I've been in touch, I've been teaching on Zoom since it began. And um, I feel like I've been in touch with the waves and kind of everybody's different, of course, but you can also see a sort of generalized wave of first anxiety and then grief, tremendous grief, as I know many people who've lost people. And the disruption was so crazy, and fear and anger and anguish and coming to exhaustion. And I feel that was just the most recent iteration. I feel like, people are just kind of poking up their heads, out of complete exhaustion. Um, and I also feel I've been practicing. I had a milestone this year. I've been meditating for 50 years, which is just unbelievable. I find it so dreamlike. Like, oh, I guess the Buddha was right about that. It is really like a dream. And I'm just immensely grateful that I have tools, that I have uh, an ability to be on retreat, for example, and also ways of coming close to really painful emotion without necessarily being defined by it. Not avoiding it and not being so frightened or ashamed, but also not getting lost in, and that's just training. I feel tremendously grateful to have a background of strong commitment to loving kindness practice, because I've always felt that even before the pandemic, as I kept reading about epidemics of loneliness happening in different places around the world, and I would read about the healing effect of social connection in various clinical conditions, I kept thinking, it can't just be numbers. It can't be, well, I only have 2 friends, I need 8 friends. It must be some inner sense of being connected that is the healing agent. And I really believe that is loving kindness. And in a time when so little is available in terms of normal ways of being together here, we have that, and we can be nurturing it and building it. And so I feel everyone who has those skills has something to share.
Sharon, congratulations. That's a fantastic milestone, and thank you for everything you've done in those 50 years, for all the people you've taught and all the teachings you've given. Personally, I think it's a conflict for people who are practicing. To what extent do you work on your mind? Do you do your practice, staying apart from the troubles of the world? And to what extent should you go out and campaign actively for a better world? I think this is very much the theme of your book, your latest book, looking at current issues. And if you go out and campaign, how can you do this without being overwhelmed?
Well, I think campaigning can take a lot of forms, and that was one of the things I was reminded of in writing that book. I wrote the book, by the way, except for the preface, I wrote the entire book before the pandemic. I turned it in, I think it was December of 2019 or maybe January of 2020. And then everything changed. And actually, I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. But when I was writing the book and conceiving of it, really, so even before writing it, I was visiting this friend, Bell Hooks, who's an American feminist author who writes a lot about love as a force of change. And Bell was saying to me she didn't like the term social action because she was afraid that it would translate perhaps in people's minds only to protesting and marching and things like that. And she looked at me and she said, what about art? What about creativity and art as methods of social change? And I thought, well, this is very true, because talking about dissolving our experience of the known and our expectations and being able to have a vision of possibility of something that is different. What about art? And so I tried to include, different artists, writers, and people like that in the book. So I have a very big vision of what trying to make a better world can look like. I think it can include, I would say, this is very different than Australia, but, not everyone votes in the US. And most of my efforts in the last year and kind of what we literally understand as social action have been in things like voter registration and urging people to vote and writing letters to voters and things like that. And so I think it might have that very classical observation. It may be some change in values and consumption or whatever we're doing, but they're linked. You can't just have an inner practice. It immediately translates into how you relate to the people you encounter, the people you think about, and so on.
You've got a concept in your book which you've called radical practice. Could you explain that a little?
Well, first of all, I think all practice is radical. Actually, I honestly do, and maybe I'll tell you the other story now. So I turned in the book, um, and I went to California for the month of February. I came back to New York in early March. Fairly quickly decided that it was a very strained atmosphere and very difficult place with a lot unknown about the transmission of the virus. And I thought, I have a house in Massachusetts. The retreat center, the Insight Meditation Society, is just a little ways through the woods in that direction. And I thought, I'll just go up to Massachusetts for a couple of weeks. So I came up with my snow boots. It'll be a year tomorrow, because things got so bad. And the book, Real Change, was supposed to come out June 1st, and then the publisher decided to postpone it to September 1st. So that gave me a little bit of time, and a friend of mine was reading the book in order to excerpt it. And he said to me, I liked the book, but I kept reading those examples and thinking, that's what made you anxious? Wait till you see what's coming. So I went back to the publisher and I said, would it be okay with you if I wrote a new preface to try to create a context, for our time, for what everything is going through? I felt there were chapters in the book like moving from anger to courage, moving from grief to resilience, and remembering to take in the joy, equanimity, that were very relevant, but it was not grounded in this current reality. So they said, okay, so then I had to write a preface. So my very intense question over and over again to myself in writing the preface was, what's still true? Like, what's still true in a time of complete disruption, shattered expectations, a lot of loss, uncertainty? What's still true? And that reminded me of one of the meanings of the word Dharma, which of course we use to mean the Buddhist teaching or the truth of things or the laws of nature. One of the meanings from the Sanskrit is that which upholds us, that which sustains us, that which we can rely on. And I kept asking myself, what's still true? What am I counting on? What am I relying on? And I realized that was my practice. Way back to like lesson 1, sit and feel the breath. Remember to breathe. It's okay to begin again. You haven't failed, and I realized that all practice just points us to what is essentially true, and it's something that we can count on. And, what people think of these days in terms of applications of the practice or extensions of the practice have to do with bringing that same kind of balanced, non-judgmental awareness to looking at different situations, communication, or I have a lot in the book about we don't often look at systems. I think as human beings, as practitioners, we go through very real transformations into greater compassion. I've had, countless students say something to me like I was walking down the street and somebody asked me for $1 and I gave them $1 because that's just been my habit. But this is the first time I ever looked that person in the eye and realized that as a human being. I've heard that over and over and over again. And I also know it doesn't necessarily lead to the question, well, what's the housing policy in this city so that there's so many people living on the street needing $1? And so being able to look at systems and being able to, it's the same facility of paying attention in a balanced way and a kind way, to be able to look more broadly, I think is also really, it's the unfolding of our time.
Thank you. I'd like to sort of move on to something that's happening in Australia at the moment. There's a huge debate at the moment about gender imbalance, and big rallies are planned against gender discrimination and violence for tomorrow. It's basically protesting about a misogynistic culture in workplaces, actually particularly our parliament, and the prevalence of sexual assault. And my question is, women who have experienced sexual assault often lose that sense of self-worth, of respect. So can you, and you do mention this briefly in your book, can you talk about the process of regaining that sense of self-worth, of regaining respect?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do it in a lot of different ways. And one of the things I really had brought home to me in writing the book, which is just one example, was how strongly that regained or amplified sense of self-respect was the basis of really effective movements to get change happening. So, for example, one of the really nice things I got to do for the book was to have a lot of people interviewed, who were activists or caregivers or people on the front lines of suffering in some way. And one of the people I had interviewed was a woman I had met. I'd heard her speak a few times, who's an African-American woman who is the leader of one of the movements in the U.S. For $15 an hour minimum wage and the right to unionize for people who work in fast food restaurants like McDonald's or, one of those restaurants. And it was an interesting coming together because, most practitioners I know don't eat at fast food restaurants necessarily and don't have any connection with this whole body of people who actually tend to work very, very hard, are not often treated fairly by their employers, and some are working full-time jobs and living in homeless shelters because they can't afford rent, and they started a movement, which was a very strong new movement for rights. And so I had wanted to talk to this one particular woman a lot, having heard her speak, and she basically said, and I saw from the many people I had met along the way that often even their own families were saying to them, don't rock the boat, don't do anything, don't say anything. You virtually have nothing now. You'll really have nothing if you get fired, just hang in there. And she didn't do it. And so what she said was basically there came a moment when she realized she was worth something. And that was the moment she realized she couldn't just go along, let it happen. And especially because she said she looked at younger people entering the field and she thought, there's going to be nothing for them, like they're worth something too. And that's when she stood up and said, yeah, it can't go on this way. And I just began understanding in a different way the relationship between that sense of self-worth and the ability to draw boundaries or take a stand or keep fighting, because none of these efforts are short-term, none of them really come without ups and downs. And so it's really like a crucial ingredient. How do we regain it? I mean, there's so many ways, and it depends on the circumstances of your life. Having somebody look at you consistently, knowing you are worth something, and they are just transmitting it, and they're mirroring that to you. That's a powerful means, whether it's a counselor or a friend or anybody, it's a very, very important thing to mirror back to people. Sometimes, I mean, I have seen it happen through loving kindness meditation. Oddly enough, like people say to me, why does it work? You're just saying these phrases. And I said, I can't tell you what it works, Some neuroscientists will be able to someday, but I know it works. I've seen it so many times. And sometimes it would be, kind of classical psychotherapy or whatever it might be. I mean, there's so many means. I think it's just important to realize it is recoverable, that it's something that we actually can reinforce, and it makes a very big difference.
Sharon, in this case, would it be a matter of really directing the love and kindness to yourself? Is that how it would work?
I think it's a combo of largely to yourself and maybe something like all beings everywhere, something like that. Because I hesitate. I know a lot of people say to me that they feel the most urgent thing is really just directing loving kindness for themselves, and so they're going to do that. And my concern about that is that it then becomes a project. Like, you'll do that until when? Like, how do you know it's enough?
Yeah.
And then there'll be that pressure on you. Like, I'm not doing it right. I don't feel the right thing. So to avoid that, I say maybe you could largely do loving kindness for yourself and then also include someone. And all beings would be a good bet, because part of what we realize along the way is that as piercing and difficult as our own suffering is, that potential for suffering is universal. And it should draw us closer to one another. We should feel more caring about one another, because it's not that we all share the same measure of pain, but we do share that vulnerability to life just changing completely. And so to have some sense of connection with others, I think is also important.
And Sharon, just looking at getting out and campaigning and protesting, one of the energies that is driving us in those sorts of things is anger. And you talk about anger and how you can harness the energy of anger and make it more positive. Just wondering if you could speak a little about that.
Yeah, well, it's confounding, isn't it? It's like we are so often activated by that sense of anger. We seem to need it, and sometimes really, I think that groups may need it, in that you may be going along having a conversation, and it's the angriest person in the room that is insisting everybody looks at some big problem, and everyone else is like studiously looking in the other direction, and they're saying, no, look at that, so we sometimes rely on that. But, I go back to some of the things in the Buddhist psychology, where the Buddha said anger is like a forest fire, which can burn up its own support. It can leave us devastated as the host. And like a fire, it might burn wild, and we might end up in a place we really don't want to be. So there's strengths in anger. There's the energy, there's the passion, there's the cutting through, the ability to cut through like social niceties and other things. And the deficits of anger are the burning. And this is not about feeling anger, it's about being overcome by anger. Because when that happens, there's also a quality of delusion, which is very strong. Like, if you think about, like, just bring up right now the last time you were really, really angry at yourself. Like, just bring it back. And you recognize that that's not a time when we also think, you know what? I did 5 great things same morning. Those are gone. Right? All we can think about is that stupid thing we said and what we did and how wrong it was. So that narrowness, that tunnel vision, has a quality of delusion in it. We don't see options. We don't see kind of the complexity of things. So what we want to do is not hate the anger or push it away or be ashamed of it, but channel it, capture that energy and be able to utilize it without being so lost in the tunnel vision and so on. We do it through mindfulness. I mean, that's the classic alchemical agent. And that has to do with, if you're sitting and say anger arises, first pivoting our attention to the feeling itself, which means not being so fascinated by the incident or the provocation for that period of time. Like, look at anger itself. What does it feel like? What is anger? Notice what you feel in your body. Notice the mood. Notice the shifting, changing emotions, because they are. It's a very complex state. You will see moments of sadness as well as rage. You'll see moments of fear. And I believe we pretty universally will see moments of helplessness, which is often at the base of kind of building that edifice of energy around it. And if we can get there, then that's the place where we can then decide, I'm going to do something. And it may seem like a really small action. It's not going to, change everything tomorrow, but we have to do it. And so you feel that helplessness. You recognize that the anger can feed energy. You take the energy and you go do something. And it's a more balanced state.
One of the examples in the book that this brings to mind is the young woman who was involved in one of the school shooting massacres, and was able to take that anger and move it into a protest. I think she went all the way to Washington. Could you talk a little bit about her, please?
Yeah, I mean, I have a number of friends in that community, and because they brought me down. The school was in this town called Parkland, Florida. It was a high school, and that particular terrible shooting tragedy, amongst many. And somebody invited me down there to teach in that same year. So I went down and I taught this really large workshop, and there were some parents there who'd lost children, and some students, and this one woman whose mother is a teacher at that particular high school, who was there that day and was not injured, but the whole community is just really traumatized. And at one point, this young woman, Samantha, who was very involved in the marches, although there are also students that I interviewed for the book who were very involved in creating the marches. Samantha said something very interesting. She said, I feel really weird. Like, I'm having this incredible day, learning these tools and being with you and hearing this approach. But I know the only reason it's happening is because that horrible thing happened. And I don't know how to get over that in order to enjoy this. And I said, I don't know that we ever get over it exactly, but we learn to hold them both at once. And that's what we call equanimity. And we talked about, in the yin yang symbol, where there's like the dark spot and the light part, and there's the light spot and the dark part. And that just became a symbol of, there's joy and there's sorrow, and there's the present reality, which may be truly terrible, and there's the realm of possibility and that vision of what could be. And we have to hold them both at once. If we only want to hold on to what could someday be, we're just floating above the pain, but if we're only immersed in the pain with no sense of something bigger or no sense of the possibility of change, then we're stuck. It's devastating. We need to be able to hold them both at once. So when the book came out, I actually did a series of things on YouTube, and one was a panel with people from Parkland, and Samantha was on the panel. So this is now 2 years after I had first gone down there. And I said, hey, Samantha, remember that conversation we had a couple of years ago about equanimity? And she said, not only do I remember it, I think about it every single day of my life. And that has been my North Star for trying to navigate through things. So there's several other people from Parkland who are in the book, including a young woman who was also on this panel, who was it was her first day at college, and I was like so cute, like her room in the college dorm on the Zoom, and she had to leave early to go to an orientation as a freshman, and just seeing like life beginning again, and that ability which never means you forget what happened, but you do approach it in a different way.
Thank you. I just want to remind everyone that we'll open it up to questions from everyone in just a little while. So if you have a question, you can write it in the chat room or just let us know that you'd like to ask a question and we can unmute you. Sharon, I was just taking a little look at your Twitter account yesterday, and you got a statement there: kindness is at the core of what it means to be and feel alive. But I was thinking about that, and I thought, no, some would say, no, it's love that's at the core. So I wanted to ask you, why is kindness so important? And when it comes to loving kindness, which is more important, the love or the kindness?
It's a strange compound. I have another much older book of mine here, The Force of Kindness. And I don't know if I can find the particular quote I was looking for, but one of the reasons I kind of celebrated kindness was because I think, at least in this society, it's really like a secondary virtue. It's like if you can't be courageous, you can't be brilliant, you can't be wonderful. It's like, okay, be kind. That's nice. It's not great, but it's good, and there's such condescension around it. And yet I think the living reality is that if we were to think of somebody in our lives who'd been very kind to us, we appreciate them, we honor them, we don't feel, pity or scorn for them. So it is really a power, it's a force. And loving kindness is an interesting compound. I say in here somewhere that kindness is like love and compassion made real. So that it's there's an activation process. We can't always make a difference in kindness, and it's not always received with great appreciation or whatever, but it's taking a more abstract value like compassion, and it's making it real. And it's one thing to say, love thy neighbor as thyself, and it's another thing you're meeting, we're not meeting, but let's say you're at a gathering and you're talking to a neighbor who you find quite boring, and you're not listening to them, and you're thinking about your email, and you're looking around, and you're sort of annoyed, and you realize, it wouldn't take that much to just listen and actually fully arrive, and that would be a kind thing to do. And it's been interesting here, in especially in the beginning, like last year in New York City, as there was so much fear and there's so much anxiety and so much unknown about, say, the transmission of the virus. And the last in-person teaching I did was on March 9th in New York City. And it was a fairly large gathering, and that particular venue, the way they do it is that the speaker sits down in the audience until they're formally introduced, and then they get up on the stage and they speak. So I was still in the audience, and the woman next to me was frantically anxious. She was like beside herself. I didn't know if I should come, but I came, and nobody knows, and it's just like, I don't know what to do. And so I said, well, like you might try breathing, and that might soothe your nervous system. And she wasn't interested. So then I said, well, there's loving kindness meditation, which could help you feel like you're not so alone. And she wasn't interested. And then I looked at her and I said, is there anybody you can help? And she lit up, and she got really radiant. And she said, well, I have this quite elderly neighbor. I could slip a note under her door and see if I could maybe get her some groceries. And she just looked happy and kind of enthusiastic the rest of the time. And I thought, look at that. It's one thing to hold it in the abstract. And if we act from some place of kindness, we're making it real, and that will really change us as well.
Thank you. And the other thing you have on your Twitter account that intrigued me, you're asking people about finding balance in their life. And you have this little statement for everyone to answer. Finding balance today means that I ... So again, balance, why is that important?
Well, the formal way of saying it, I suppose, would be equanimity, and which means balance. And equanimity is an extremely odd term. I first began practicing 50 years ago in January in Bodh Gaya, India. It was a 10-day meditation retreat led by S.N. Goenka. And Goenka used to go around saying, be equanimous, be equanimous, be equanimous. And we used to whisper to one another, like, is that a word? Like, what does it mean? I never heard it. And even in the form of equanimity, it tends to be seen as indifference or coldness or withdrawing from life, which it doesn't really mean at all. It means balance. And in this context, it's the balance born of wisdom. It's perspective. And I didn't used to like the word balance either. I used to think, well, that's boring. That's like being mediocre. But the whole idea really of many systems of meditation is that if we can bring our system into balance, the things that we want, like insight, connection, will emerge by themselves. So we don't grab after trying to get an experience. The work is toward balance. Maybe our relationship in general, as just one example, to emotions is that we're way back. And so the balance looks like come forward a little bit, feel more clearly and truly. Maybe we're out of balance in the other way, that we're completely immersed and overcome by everything. So there's not enough space to really learn, to see more deeply, to see that anger example, what are the other emotions, So we need to get more centered and have more space. It looks different at different times, but that's the work. And so many things will emerge from bringing our system more into balance, and that's what we're really trying to do.
Thank you. Jack has a question for you relating to your wonderful 50 years of practice. Jack.
Yeah, hi. I was just curious, when, back in that time, 50 years ago, there wasn't a lot of people in the US or wherever in the West doing Buddhist practice. So I was just curious, like, is there something that you can think of that sparked the interest? Or how did you think to go to India or whatever it was that you did when you started?
Yeah, there was some very specific things. It's funny. I just taught a meditation and Q&A session for some students, and then faculty at a university here. And by the time I was, separately with the faculty, they had a question that they wanted everyone to answer, which was, if you think back to yourself as a freshman, your first year, what would be the piece of advice you would give? And for me, it would be just wait a year, because it all happened in my next year of college. Just like hang in there for a year, So when I was a sophomore in college, I took an Asian philosophy course. There was a philosophy requirement, so I needed to do some kind of philosophy course. And honestly, as far as I can remember, looking back, it was convenient to my schedule, that particular one. So I said, I'll do that one. And it totally changed my life. So there were two parts particularly to that course. One was in discussing the Buddha and discussing his statement about suffering being a part of life. That for me was a very liberating statement, because I'd had a childhood full of suffering. And like for many people, mine was a family where this was never ever really spoken about. And so I didn't know what to do with all of those feelings inside. And it was the first time kind of hearing that statement that I thought, oh, like I belong. This is part of life. It's not just me. So that was very important. And then I heard in the context of that class that there were techniques, there were methods, there were actual practices that if you did them, if you practiced them, you could be a lot happier, they say. So I look at that moment all the time because something happened. You know, it would have been so easy and so much more like me to say, that's interesting. Other people can do it. I could never do it. Or maybe once I graduate in 2 years, I'll think about finding it. Or maybe I'll go to graduate school doing comparative religion or something. But instead, I thought, I've got to learn how to do this. So I was going to college in this town called Buffalo, New York, which may have the worst weather in the entire United States. And I looked around Buffalo and I didn't see it anywhere. This is 1970. So I created an independent study project and I presented it to the university and said that I want to go to India and learn how to meditate. And they approved it. So off I went with my student loans and my scholarships, and that's how I got to India.
And overcome a lot of personal fear. I think it's a remarkable story. Sharon, the other Sharon, has a question for you. This is Sharon Thrupp, our treasurer at Sacred Eater Australia.
Sorry, I'm just unmuting myself. So thank you very much, Sharon, for a wonderful, wonderful talk. And certainly I follow your meditations. I was just curious because, you know, having attended quite a few Dalai Lama's teachings over many years, he always says that anger is the most destructive emotion that we can have. And however, and, you know, every time you have one angry moment can cancel out all the other positive, you know, deeds and emotions that you have. So what you were saying today is that anger channeled in the right direction can be positive. So is that, can you just speak a little bit about that kind of,
Sure,
please?
Well, I would never want to contradict the Dalai Lama because, I mean, really, you know, so these things usually warrant like quite a bit of discussion. My understanding, and what I've been taught was basically there's a very big difference between having a feeling of anger and being identified in some way with the anger. You know, one could have a feeling of anger emerge, and it's almost like a weather pattern moving through your body. You're not holding it. You're not building plans of revenge based on it. You're not, you know, swimming around in the grudge and how horrible, you know, so you're not like absorbing all that toxicity. And, you know, if you go back to imagery used in Tibetan teaching, like see your thoughts and feelings like clouds moving through the sky. Some are light and fluffy looking, some are really ominous looking, but they're all just clouds moving through the sky. So that's one way of experiencing anger. Another way is the way we usually experience it, which is we identify, we're consumed by it, we get lost in that tunnel vision, we experience the burning, the self-destructiveness, and that kind of wanton acting out, you know, like a forest fire, which might leave us someplace we don't want to be. Like when I was writing Real Change, I had the thought, oh, you know, I really want to quote Gandhi when he said something like, when you're lost in anger. And again, I just always try to make this differentiation between like feeling the anger, which is like the cloud moving through the sky, compared to really sucking it in, right? So I had the thought, I want to quote Gandhi saying, when you're lost in anger, it's like drinking poison, thinking you're going to kill the other guy. So then I looked it up because I wanted to use it in the book. And I never once saw it attributed to Gandhi. I saw it attributed to the Buddha and Oprah Winfrey and Carrie Fisher from Star Wars and the Big Book of AA and Nelson Mandela. And I have no idea who said it, but it's the essential truth. So it's not that we try to work through the pattern of the anger because we think we're bad for feeling it, but it's out of the greatest self-compassion. This can destroy me. And it doesn't have to be that way, because we grab onto the anger because we think it's our only source of strength, basically. And for some people it might genuinely feel that way, but that's part of the teaching about compassion, that this is not just laying down and feeling bad. This is actually a greater source of strength for action, but it's not something that we necessarily believe, and so we need to experience some of that to trust that.
Thank you. Look, we're coming up to time, so if anyone has questions, let us know quickly. But I'd just like to recognise and honour that we have some venerables with us today, and Kamalekshe Somo has joined us from Hawaii. Kamalekshe, is there anything you'd like to say to us?
Well, I'd just like to express my appreciation for Sharon's talk, which was very meaningful, and for all the good work that all of you are doing, each in our own ways. We're just keeping the Dharma alive, and I think it's reaching a lot of people in some very positive ways, helpful ways today during this crisis, because people are really suffering. Well-known teachers are having mental breakdowns. It's really quite tragic. And so we're so fortunate to have the Dharma teachings to help us, like a life vest or something, in this time. So I think I encourage all of us to just carry on and share what we can if people are interested. Helps people a lot, Yeah.
Thank you, Kamalekshe. And Venerable Chikwan is also with us. Is there anything you'd like to say, Venerable? You have to unmute yourself.
Muting. There we go. Well, thank you, Sharon. It was a wonderful, very in-depth sharing, and I personally gained an enormous amount from it. I particularly liked on many levels, I liked what you had to share, but I found your review on kindness, which is a word that I use all the time, often in my emails, as others on the Sakadita committee know, kindly Jigwan, or, with kindness. I use this word all the time, and for the same purpose. So thank you for bringing more meaning to that too. And yes, just wonderful to see so many people have joined Sakadita for this talk, and hopefully more talks that we can offer. And too, to recognize the work that Venerable Lekshe Soma has done for so many years in getting this movement off the ground, and, being in the background for all those who have been the presidents and on the committees and continuing. So we have a new committee for the International Sakadita coming up soon, and maybe the Australian Sakadita will change with their committee with the next AGM. So if people have time, I would like to, invite you onto our committee if you're in Australia. And yeah, again, just wonderful to be able to have teachers like Sharon and Venerables Somo and Tenzin Palmo and others who have come to bring their incredible wealth and many, many years of great wisdom and compassionate action and kind action, the everyday kind action. Yeah, thank you. And
thank you, Venerable Chikwan. I think we may even have people from Sakadita Canada with us today. So I'm not sure who you are, but thank you. Thank you for joining us. And of course, thank you very much, Sharon. We're out of time now, so we really appreciate you joining us, because we certainly know how busy you are with your teaching and writing. So we very much appreciate your time. And for the rest of us, if To continue being inspired, I suggest you read Real Change or any of Sharon's other books. I remember reading Loving Kindness years and years ago, and it just really spoke to me. You can also listen to Sharon's Meta Hour podcast, where she talks to and interviews various people. There's her website, SharonSalzberg.com, or the Insight Meditation Society website, that's Dharma with an R.org. And Insight Meditation, speaking about anniversaries, is coming up to its 45th, so that's quite remarkable.
Wow.
The video of this talk will be posted on our YouTube channel later this week. Check that out and tell your friends about us. As is the custom, and as Jack mentioned earlier, we usually give dana to our teacher, but Sharon has kindly said we can take the dana and give it to people in need. So we'd appreciate that if you could afford to make a donation, and our bank details are currently on the chat room. So all I can say now is thank you all for joining us, and we hope to bring you more teachings in the coming months, and we'll keep you posted. Any final words, Sharon? You're muted. Sorry.
That's the mantra of the time. I really just wanted to thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you for all your work.
And goodbye, and enjoy your Saturday or Sunday, wherever you are in the world. And stay kind.